Think you know everything about Aaron McGruder's groundbreaking animated series? From banned episodes that caused legal threats to a voice actress playing both Freeman brothers, the Boondocks hides some truly bizarre production secrets. Discover the animation studio switcheroo that changed the show's look forever, the real reason the creator abandoned his own series, and why certain episodes were deemed too controversial for American television but aired freely in Canada. Fact 1. Regina King voices both brothers. When you watch the Boondocks, you hear two completely different young voices arguing, scheming, and getting into trouble throughout Woodcrest. 10-year-old Huey Freeman sounds like a serious, thoughtful revolutionary, while his 8-year-old brother Riley comes across as a street-smart troublemaker with an entirely different vocal personality. What most viewers never realize is that both of these distinct characters are actually voiced by the same person, Regina King. This casting choice was far from obvious, since King was already an established live-action actress known for her roles in shows like 227 and films like Ray. Voice acting, especially playing multiple characters in the same series, requires a completely different skill set than traditional acting. King had to create two separate vocal identities that were so convincing that audiences would never suspect they came from the same person. The technical challenge goes beyond just changing her voice pitch or tone. King had to develop distinct speech patterns, breathing rhythms, and emotional ranges for each brother. Huey needed to sound intellectual and measured, often delivering complex political commentary with the confidence of someone much older. Riley, on the other hand, required a more energetic, impulsive vocal style that captured his obsession with hip-hop culture and his tendency to get into trouble. What makes this even more impressive is that King often had to record scenes where both brothers were talking to each other, essentially having conversations with herself. The sound engineers would have to carefully layer her different performances to create believable dialogue between the two characters. King's ability to seamlessly switch between these two very different personalities helped establish the core dynamic that drove the entire series, proving that sometimes the most surprising casting choices lead to the most memorable performances. Fact 2. Fox rejected the original pilot. The Boondocks almost never made it to television because the original pilot was rejected by Fox for being too tame and conventional for what would eventually become one of the most controversial animated series ever created. Between the fall of 2003 and summer of 2004, Aaron McGruder worked with film producer and director Reginald Hudlin to create a pilot episode specifically designed for the Fox network, but they struggled to make the series acceptable for network television standards. The collaboration between McGruder and Hudlin seemed promising at first, since Hudlin had experience in both film and television production and understood the entertainment industry's requirements for mainstream success. However, the process of trying to make the Boondocks suitable for network television apparently stripped away much of what made the comic strip unique and provocative, resulting in a pilot that satisfied neither the creators nor the network executives. When Fox ultimately rejected the pilot, it seemed like the Boondocks might never find a home on television, but the project was rescued by an unexpected source. Mike Lazo, who served as president of Adult Swim and had executive producer credits on shows like Aqua Teen Hunger Force and Space Ghost Coast to Coast, somehow came across the rejected Fox pilot and immediately recognized its potential. Lazo's reaction to the pilot was both blunt and liberating for McGruder. He declared the Fox version too networky, meaning it had been sanitized and constrained by the limitations of broadcast television. Instead of asking for changes or revisions, Lazo made McGruder an offer that would transform the entire project. He ordered a 15-episode season and told McGruder to simply just tell stories without worrying about network television restrictions. This creative freedom allowed the Boondocks to become the uncompromising, controversial series that McGruder had originally envisioned. Fact 3. BET threatened legal action. 2 entire episodes of the Boondocks were completely banned from American television after the network they brutally mocked decided to fight back with legal threats. The episodes in question, titled The Hunger Strike and the Uncle Ruckus reality show, were originally scheduled to air during Season 2 in late 2007, but they never made it to American screens because they contained some of the most savage television parodies ever created. These episodes specifically targeted BET, which stands for Black Entertainment Television, and portrayed the network as being run by evil executives who openly admitted they wanted to destroy black people through terrible programming. The show created fictional characters that were obvious parodies of real BET executives, including Deborah Leavell, who was clearly meant to represent BET's actual CEO Deborah Lee, and Wedgie Rudlin, a mockery of BET's president Reginald Hudlin, who had ironically been credited as an executive producer on the Boondocks itself due to contractual obligations from an earlier failed deal. The parodies were so harsh and specific that BET's parent company, Viacom, decided they couldn't let the episodes air without a fight. According to anonymous sources close to the production, Viacom threatened Sony Pictures Television, which produced the Boondocks, with legal action if the episodes were broadcast in the United States. This created an unusual situation where Cartoon Network and Adult Swim publicly stated that neither BET nor its executives had contacted them directly, but the legal pressure from Viacom was apparently strong enough to keep the episodes off American television. The banned episodes did manage to air in Canada on the Teletoon network, complete with disclaimers stating that the views expressed didn't represent the opinions of the Canadian broadcasters. American fans had to wait until 2020, more than 12 years later, before these episodes finally premiered on Adult Swim during a special marathon event. Fact 4. Animation Studio Conspiracy. The Boondocks went through a mysterious animation studio switch that completely transformed the look of the show, and for years, creator Aaron McGruder told a story that wasn't entirely true. In 2006, McGruder publicly announced in interviews that his series was being animated by Madhouse, the prestigious Japanese studio famous for creating anime classics like Death Note and Cowboy Bebop. He seemed excited about this partnership, explaining how having a Japanese anime studio would help elevate the visual quality of his manga-influenced series. However, if you actually look at the credits for the Boondocks, Madhouse is nowhere to be found. Instead, starting with Season 2, all the animation work was credited to MOI Animation, an Emmy Award-winning South Korean studio that was actually a subsidiary of Madhouse. This created a confusing situation where McGruder was technically telling the truth about working with Madhouse, but the actual hands-on animation was being done by their Korean partner studio. What makes this situation even stranger is that the deal with Madhouse apparently fell through at some point, though the exact details of what went wrong have never been publicly explained. MOI Animation ended up taking over the animation duties completely, and the results were immediately visible to viewers. Starting with Season 2, the Boondocks featured much more detailed character designs, smoother action sequences, and significantly improved visual quality compared to the first season. The animation upgrade was so dramatic that fans could easily spot the difference between the earlier and later episodes. The fight scenes became more dynamic, the character expressions were more nuanced, and the overall production value increased substantially. This behind-the-scenes studio shuffle accidentally resulted in one of the most noticeable visual improvements in animated television history, even though most viewers had no idea why the show suddenly looked so much better. Fact 5. Creator abandoned his own show. Aaron McGruder completely walked away from the Boondocks before the fourth and final season, leaving his own creation in the hands of other people for reasons that went far beyond simple creative differences. The official explanation from Sony Pictures Television was diplomatically vague, stating that the season was produced without McGruder's involvement because a mutually agreeable production schedule could not be determined, but leaked emails later revealed a much uglier behind-the-scenes battle. McGruder had been the driving force behind the Boondocks since its comic strip days in the late 1990s, writing or co-writing every single episode through the first 3 seasons. His departure was shocking because he had always been extremely protective of his characters and the show's political message, personally navigating what he called minefields of controversy to maintain the series' edge and authenticity. The real drama became public when leaked emails showed Sony executives expressing serious frustration with McGruder's work pace and creative process. According to reports from BuzzFeed, Sony executives used harsh language to describe the creator, with one reportedly saying, when discussing McGruder's demands for how his departure should be announced to the public. The emails revealed that there had been ongoing tensions about production schedules, with Sony apparently viewing McGruder as slow and difficult to work with. McGruder eventually released his own statement explaining that he had grown tired of the controversy and wanted to move on to new projects, specifically mentioning his upcoming Adult Swim series Black Jesus. He wrote about the enormous responsibility he felt toward the show's young audience and his commitment to offending for the right reasons, suggesting that the corporate pressure had made it impossible for him to maintain the standards he felt the show deserved. Fact 6. Samuel L. Jackson recreated Pulp Fiction. Samuel L. Jackson brought one of his most famous movie moments directly into the Boondocks. When he voiced the character Gin Rummy, a former Special Forces soldier who teams up with Ed Wunkler III on various misguided adventures throughout the series. Jackson didn't just lend his distinctive voice to the animated show, he actually recreated specific dialogue from his legendary performance as Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction, creating a bizarre crossover moment that most viewers probably missed. The recreation happened during a scene where Gin Rummy is riding in a car with Riley Freeman, and Riley keeps responding to Rummy's statements by simply saying, "What?" over and over again. Instead of creating new dialogue for this moment, the writers had Jackson perform almost the exact same conversation that his character Jules had in Pulp Fiction when interrogating a man about his boss. The rhythm, the escalating frustration, and even Jackson's delivery were nearly identical to the original movie scene, creating an inside joke for fans who recognized the reference. This wasn't the only Pulp Fiction reference involving Gin Rummy, as the character also made comments about wanting a tasty beverage, another direct callback to Jules Winfield's memorable dialogue. The character of Gin Rummy was clearly designed as a parody of Donald Rumsfeld, the former Secretary of Defense, but Jackson's performance style drew heavily from his most famous film role, creating a strange hybrid character that combined political satire with movie references. Jackson appeared in multiple episodes throughout the series, always bringing the same intensity and memorable speech patterns that made him famous. The fact that he was willing to essentially parody his own iconic performance while voicing a completely different character in an animated series shows both his sense of humor and his commitment to the show's irreverent approach to pop culture references. Fact 7. Canadian censorship loophole. While American viewers were completely blocked from seeing two controversial Boondocks episodes for over 12 years, Canadian audiences got to watch them with no problems at all, creating one of the strangest censorship situations in television history. The episodes The Hunger Strike and The Uncle Ruckus Reality Show aired on the Canadian network Teletoon in March of 2008, just months after they were supposed to premiere in the United States, but were pulled due to legal pressure. The Canadian broadcasts weren't completely without controversy, as Teletoon made sure to protect themselves by running disclaimers before the episodes aired. These disclaimers specifically stated that the views expressed in the program, particularly the harsh criticisms of BET, did not reflect the opinions of Teletoon Canada or its parent companies. This legal protection allowed Canadian viewers to see exactly what American audiences were missing, including the brutal parodies of real media executives and the show's most savage commentary on black entertainment television. What made this situation even more unusual was that Canadian fans could also stream these banned episodes on Netflix, while American Netflix subscribers had no access to them whatsoever. This created a bizarre digital divide where the same streaming service offered different content based purely on geography, with Canadian subscribers getting the complete, uncensored version of the Boondocks, while Americans were left with gaps in the series. The episodes remained easily available in Canada throughout the entire ban period, which lasted until May of 2020, when Adult Swim finally aired them during a special Boondocks marathon. During those 12 years, American fans who wanted to see the banned content had to either travel to Canada, use various internet workarounds, or wait for the eventual DVD releases that included the episodes as special features, making Canada an unexpected safe haven for controversial American animation. Fact 8. Tyler Perry complained to executives. Tyler Perry was so upset by his portrayal in the Boondocks that he personally contacted television executives to complain about how the show had depicted him, creating an awkward situation for Turner Broadcasting and Adult Swim. The episode in question, titled Pause, featured a character named Winston Jerome, who was clearly meant to be a parody of Perry, portrayed as a cross-dressing filmmaker who used his Christian faith as a cover for questionable behavior, and led what the show described as a homoerotic cult. The parody was particularly harsh because it didn't just mock Perry's filmmaking style or his popular Medea character, but went much deeper by suggesting that his religious persona was hiding his true sexuality and manipulative tendencies. The Los Angeles Times later described the episode as containing one of the sharpest public criticisms of Perry that had ever appeared on television, which gives some indication of just how brutal the satire actually was. Perry's response was swift and direct, as he got in touch with executives at Turner Broadcasting, the parent company of Cartoon Network and Adult Swim, to voice his displeasure about the episode. According to reports, Perry complained loudly about his portrayal and even threatened to reconsider his business relationship with the company, which put the network in a difficult position, since Perry was a valuable content creator for other Turner properties. The network's response revealed how seriously they took Perry's complaints, as Turner executives reportedly told him that they should have given him advance warning before the episode aired. This admission suggested that the network recognized the parody had crossed certain lines and that they might have handled the situation differently if they had anticipated the backlash. The episode continued to air in reruns, but Perry's complaint highlighted the real-world consequences that could result from the Boondocks' particularly savage approach to celebrity satire. Fact 9. Uncle Ruckus movie Kickstarter failed. Aaron McGruder tried to bring one of the Boondocks' most controversial characters to the big screen through crowdfunding, but his ambitious plan for an Uncle Ruckus movie fell significantly short of its financial goal. In 2013, McGruder launched a Kickstarter campaign with the goal of raising $200,000 to fund a feature film centered around Uncle Ruckus, the self-hating character who consistently expressed racist views against his own community throughout the animated series. The proposed movie would have featured Gary Anthony Williams reprising his voice role as Uncle Ruckus, maintaining continuity with the television series that had made the character both infamous and strangely popular among fans. McGruder set up a dedicated website at uncleruckusmovie.com, where supporters could learn more about the project and contribute to the funding campaign, which ran from January 30th to March 1st of 2013. Despite the character's popularity and the devoted fan base that the Boondocks had built over its television run, the crowdfunding campaign struggled to gain momentum with potential backers. When the funding deadline arrived, the project had attracted 2,667 supporters who contributed a total of $129,963, leaving the campaign nearly $70,000 short of its target. The failure of the Kickstarter campaign meant that the Uncle Ruckus movie never moved forward into production, leaving fans without the feature-length exploration of the character that McGruder had envisioned. This unsuccessful crowdfunding attempt highlighted the challenges that even popular creators face when trying to finance independent projects, especially when those projects center around characters as controversial and potentially polarizing as Uncle Ruckus, whose extreme views made him both memorable and difficult to market to mainstream audiences. Fact 10. Reginald Hudlin, executive producer credit. One of the strangest situations in the Boondocks production history involved Reginald Hudlin, who remained credited as an executive producer on the first 2 seasons, despite having absolutely no involvement with the show after its very early development stages. Hudlin, who served as president of entertainment for BET from 2005 to 2008, had originally partnered with Aaron McGruder to create a pilot episode for the Fox network between the fall of 2003 and summer of 2004. The Fox deal ultimately fell through because McGruder and Hudlin couldn't make the series acceptable for network television standards, leading to what seemed like the end of their working relationship. Hudlin completely left the project when Fox rejected the pilot, moving on to his executive role at BET, while McGruder continued developing the show with Sony Pictures Television and eventually found a home at Adult Swim. However, the contracts that had been signed during the Fox development period contained language that legally required McGruder and Sony to continue crediting Hudlin as an executive producer, even though he had no creative input, financial involvement, or day-to-day participation in the actual production of the television series. This created the unusual situation where viewers watching the Boondocks would see Hudlin's name in the credits of every episode during the first 2 seasons, despite his complete absence from the show's creation. The irony of this situation became even more pronounced when the Boondocks later created savage parodies of BET and its executives, including a character named Wedgie Rudlin who was clearly meant to mock the real Reginald Hudlin. This meant that Hudlin was contractually credited as an executive producer on a show that was actively making fun of him and the network he ran, creating one of the most awkward credit situations in television history. Fact 11. Anime studio name confusion. Aaron McGruder created years of confusion about which animation studio was actually working on the Boondocks by repeatedly mentioning the wrong company name in public interviews and statements. In 2006, McGruder told reporters during an interview that his series now had a Japanese anime studio named Madhouse to help us out, referring to the prestigious animation house known for creating acclaimed series like Death Note and Perfect Blue. This statement made perfect sense to fans and journalists because Madhouse had an excellent reputation for high-quality animation that would naturally appeal to McGruder, who had always been open about his love for anime and manga. The Boondocks was heavily influenced by Japanese animation style, so having Madhouse involved seemed like a logical partnership that would elevate the show's visual quality to match McGruder's artistic vision. However, anyone who carefully examined the actual credits of the Boondocks episodes would notice something strange. Madhouse was never listed anywhere as the animation studio. Instead, all the animation work starting with Season 2 was credited to MOI Animation, a South Korean studio that happened to be a subsidiary of Madhouse but operated as a completely separate entity with its own staff and facilities. This discrepancy between McGruder's public statements and the official credits created a confusing situation where the creator of the show was essentially giving credit to the wrong studio, even though he wasn't technically lying since MOI Animation was owned by Madhouse. The mix-up persisted for years because McGruder continued to reference Madhouse in interviews, while MOI Animation remained the uncredited workhorse actually producing the improved animation that viewers could see on screen. This confusion highlights how complex the relationships between parent companies and their subsidiaries can be in the international animation industry, where the actual work often gets done by smaller studios that operate under the umbrella of larger, more famous names. Fact 12. Al Sharpton protested MLK episode. Reverend Al Sharpton launched a public protest against the Boondocks and demanded an official apology from Cartoon Network after the show depicted Martin Luther King Jr. using racial slurs in one of its most controversial episodes. The episode in question, titled Return of the King, presented an alternate history scenario where the civil rights leader had survived his assassination attempt and awakened from a coma in the early 2000s to witness how American society had changed. In this fictional storyline, the Martin Luther King Jr. character became increasingly frustrated and angry as he observed what he perceived as the deterioration of the black community, eventually using language that included the N-word during his speeches. The episode was meant as social commentary about how the civil rights movement's goals had been undermined, but Sharpton and other critics saw it as deeply disrespectful to King's memory and legacy. Sharpton's response was swift and uncompromising, as he publicly declared that Cartoon Network must apologize and also commit to pulling episodes that desecrate Black historic figures. His protest highlighted the tension between the Boondocks' satirical approach to serious social issues and the reverence that many people felt should be shown towards civil rights icons, particularly someone as universally respected as Martin Luther King Jr. Cartoon Network chose to defend the episode and Aaron McGruder's creative vision rather than bow to Sharpton's demands for an apology and removal. The network released a statement supporting McGruder, saying they believed he had created a thought-provoking way of not only showing Dr. King's legacy but also of reminding us of what he stood for. The episode continued to air in reruns despite the controversy, though it remained one of the most debated and polarizing episodes in the entire series, demonstrating how the Boondocks consistently pushed boundaries that made even supportive viewers uncomfortable. Fact 13. 4 episodes permanently banned. The Boondocks has the unusual distinction of having multiple episodes that were completely removed from circulation, with one episode being permanently retired due to what Adult Swim officially described as cultural sensitivities. Beyond the 2 BET episodes that were temporarily banned, the story of Jimmy Rebel from Season 3 was deemed so problematic that it has been permanently pulled from all streaming platforms and television reruns, making it nearly impossible for modern audiences to view. The story of Jimmy Rebel centered around Uncle Ruckus meeting his favorite country music artist, a character named Jimmy Rebel, who was clearly based on Johnny Rebel, a real-life white supremacist musician who recorded racist songs during the civil rights era. The episode explored themes of racial hatred and Uncle Ruckus's self-loathing through his admiration for this fictional racist performer, creating content that Adult Swim later decided crossed lines that made it unsuitable for contemporary viewing. When The Boondocks was added to HBO Max in 2020, the story of Jimmy Rebel was intentionally excluded from the streaming catalog, and an Adult Swim representative confirmed to the Daily Beast that the episode had been permanently retired due to cultural sensitivities. The network explained that when they transition series to new platforms, they evaluate content through creative and cultural filters and our standards and practices policies, often making these decisions in collaboration with show creators. A 4th episode, Pause, has also been rarely seen in reruns, though it hasn't been officially banned like the others. The episode's brutal parody of Tyler Perry was considered so harsh that it's been quietly removed from regular rotation. This means that out of 55 total episodes produced across 4 seasons, at least 4 have been either permanently banned or significantly restricted from public viewing, giving the Boondocks one of the highest rates of censored content in modern animated television history. Fact 14. John Witherspoon's Friday references. John Witherspoon created one of the most clever running gags in the Boondocks by having his character Granddad frequently reminisce about events from the movie Friday, as if they were actual memories from his own life. This inside joke worked perfectly because Witherspoon had played Mr. Jones, the father character, in the original 1995 comedy film Friday starring Ice Cube and Chris Tucker, as well as in the subsequent sequels Next Friday and Friday After Next. Throughout the Boondocks series, Granddad would casually reference situations and conversations that viewers familiar with the Friday movies would immediately recognize as scenes from those films. He would tell stories about past experiences that were actually plot lines from the movies, delivering them with the same nostalgic tone that elderly people use when sharing genuine memories from their younger days. This creative decision by the show's writers allowed Witherspoon to essentially reference his own previous acting work while staying completely in character as Robert Freeman. The references were subtle enough that viewers who hadn't seen the Friday movies wouldn't realize anything unusual was happening. But fans of both the Boondocks and the Friday franchise got to enjoy the meta-humor of watching Granddad treat fictional movie scenes as real events from his past. The running gag also served as a tribute to Witherspoon's most famous role and helped establish Granddad's personality as someone who had lived through many experiences and adventures even if those experiences had actually happened to a different character in a completely different movie. This blending of Witherspoon's real filmography with his animated character's fictional backstory created a unique form of self-referential comedy that added an extra layer of entertainment for viewers who caught the references, while never disrupting the flow of the show for those who missed them. Fact 15. HBO Max reboot cancelled. The Boondocks was supposed to make a triumphant return to television with Aaron McGruder back in control, but the highly anticipated revival was cancelled after years of development and significant work had already been completed. In June of 2019, Sony Pictures Animation announced that they would be producing what they called a reimagining of the Boondocks for HBO Max, with McGruder returning as showrunner and executive producer after his absence from the disappointing fourth season. The revival project seemed promising from the beginning, as HBO Max had ordered 2 full seasons consisting of 12 episodes each, giving McGruder the creative freedom and episode count he needed to properly develop new storylines. The series was originally scheduled to premiere in 2022, and John Witherspoon had been confirmed to reprise his beloved role as Granddad before his unexpected death in October of 2019, just months after the revival was announced. Production on the new episodes actually moved forward despite Witherspoon's passing, with voice actors beginning to record their performances for what would have been the 5th and 6th seasons of the series. Gary Anthony Williams, who had voiced Uncle Ruckus throughout the original run, later revealed in interviews that he had already completed voice work for 8 full episodes before receiving the devastating news that Sony had decided to cancel the entire project. The cancellation was announced in February of 2022 by Cedric Yarbrough, who had voiced Tom Dubois in the original series, and confirmed that Sony Pictures Television had pulled the plug on the revival. Williams later explained that the project's downfall came from the same issue that had plagued the original series. It simply took too long to produce. The cancellation meant that all the completed voice work, scripts, and development efforts were essentially wasted, leaving fans without the McGruder-led revival they had been eagerly anticipating for years.